All right. Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to Sadozi Finance Friday. Every Friday, we speak with a strategic finance professional, and I'm very excited this week to have Zach Ryle here. Zach is from Peak. Welcome, Zach.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Good, good. I'm excited for you to be here the week before Thanksgiving. Everyone's thinking about that turkey and holiday and family and friends. But before we go to that, let's learn a little bit about you and what brought you over to Peak.
Yeah, for sure. So first, I'm going to start by saying I don't have any beekeepers in my model, but in the effort
Not
of
yet,
learning,
not
not
yet.
yet, not yet, right? In the effort of learning our business, we look at all kinds of different things, and at one point in time at Peak, we found some data about rainfall in the Colorado River Basin, and we found that if X rainfall happened, it would affect our
Oh,
revenue
wow.
by X%, right? We found this correlation, and I was like,
Yeah.
that's really sweet, that's awesome. Unfortunately, I don't know how to predict rainfall, so that doesn't help me a ton, right? And so,
Yeah.
I thought that was what came to my mind when I saw the post. Is I think there's a lot of really cool things that we can,
Yep.
as finance people, try to attribute and figure out correlations in the macroeconomic world. And then sometimes we're like, well, that's a cool correlation, but that might not actually
What am I
help me
going to
that
do with
much.
it?
Yeah, what am I
Yeah.
going to do with it, right?
Yeah.
So, but no, so happy to be here and talk about all these things. I think you said tell me a little about myself, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. How did you get into this FP&A world?
yeah, funny story. So I when I started school, I was like, I don't know, I'm going to go into business, right? And as most people, I think, kind of just have no idea, they stumble into something. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to teach physics. I like physics, and a buddy of mine was like, no, man, you need to be an aerospace engineer. And I was like, yeah, I like airplanes. I should be an
That's
aerospace
it.
engineer. Yeah. And then I took some engineering classes, and I was like, alert, alert, this is not for me. And one of my lifelong friends was just about I think he was one semester away from graduating with his degree in finance. He's like, listen, I've been watching for a little while, and I think you need to do finance, and here's why.
Hmm.
And I was like, that
Hmm.
sounds great. So I took a finance course, and I just fell in love. I
Loved it.
absolutely
Yeah.
love finance. I love being able to look at things and problem solve and be analytical and all the things that come with that. But I loved also getting to interact with people and work there. And so decided on finance, and then this other connection that I made earlier in my life, he reached out and said, hey, I see you're doing finance now. How about you come do an internship for me? And I was
Hmm.
like, yeah, definitely. And so I went and did this internship that ended up being more of an operations internship than it was a finance internship. And long story short, I did my last year of school working full time for this company in operations while in Ohio while going to school in Utah. So that was a fun thing to coordinate and try to
Oh,
figure
wow.
out how I could
Yeah.
get all that done. And this was pre-COVID, right? So online was not as prevalent as it is today.
Yep.
And but I like talking about that. I think it's really important. Like finance can get a bad rap for being all about the numbers and not get how
Right.
things work. And so I'm really glad I started in operations because I spent my days running operations, figuring out how to do things and how to get stuff out the door and actually deliver our product,
Making
right?
decisions for the business every single day there.
Yeah, right. And so so when it came time to like jump back into finance, I was like, oh, this comes from that. This is directly affected by that. If I
Right.
push on this, it will change blah blah blah, right? And the other thing is I was this I was like this fresh college kind of graduate, not really a graduate. And I worked with the VP of sales and the VP of operations. And I had to get both of them to listen to me and do what I said. Right. And like, they had no business listening to me and I had no business telling them what to do. But I learned so much about like, how do you influence people? How do you have leadership when it's not hierarchical leadership? And
Totally.
how do you get people to buy into an idea and a belief, which has been very impactful, I think, in my career.
Yeah, being kind of a strategic leader and a liaison at an early age, and when to show numbers, when not to show numbers, and
Right.
getting all of those insights. I think that you had a really great experience early on in that finance leadership role. So take us a little bit, fast forward a few years, and
Sure.
what got you over to Peak?
Yeah, so I following the same pattern, I got some opportunities to go to some cool places with some people who became mentors to me and took a chance on me, and hopped around to a couple different companies, different states, in some PE backed companies, just building out a finance practice and really making it so it could be scalable and effective and efficient. And then I started looking around and I said, I've moved a lot. I've done some different companies. I really want to get to a place where I care about the company. I care about the culture of the company and the people there. I want to be closer to family, and I want to do something a little more on my own, and not to diminish all the good that my mentors had done for me and they had been able to provide for me, but to really stand on my own 2 feet. And so I started looking, and then I found this opportunity at Peak. And I'd actually, interesting enough, right before the pandemic, I actually interviewed briefly with them for a position that wasn't a good fit, but it was a
Hmm.
great experience. The people were really nice. So I said, hey, I remember these guys. They're pretty cool. I'll go check them out. And so interviewed and met the team. I learned about the product. I saw the potential, and I said, I want to be there. This is the place I want to be. I want to have an
Yeah,
impact. I want to be able to influence things. And they were like, hey, good news. We're fully remote, so you can live anywhere. And I was like, perfect.
yeah,
Let's go for it.
perfect.
Right. Let's give it a shot.
That's an amazing story about the sort of the relationship building, even with a company, for future companies, and just being able to maintain that for that period of time, even if it wasn't a right fit at that moment. Continuing to stay in touch and see what you never know what happens in the future.
Yeah. The world is smaller than we think. There's always a
Yeah.
connection, somebody, somewhere, sometime. So
So you dive into Peak, and you got to tell this story about you driving to Salt
yeah.
Lake City and working on the road.
Yeah. So I started the last week of November at Peak, and then like a week later, I was driving cross country with our 29-foot or whatever foot moving truck, and we had this call with a vendor. I think it was for some software we are going to put in, and I was the lead on it. And so I was like, oh, I'll just hop on while I'm driving. It's not a big deal, right? And so we're in the middle of Iowa, and right before I hop on this call, my buddy who lives in Illinois texts me, goes, "Hey man, are you being careful?" And I was like, yeah, of course I'm being careful. Like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about? Right? He's like, no, I mean with the storm. And I was like, oh yeah, the weather's a little bad. He's like, there's a land hurricane in Iowa. And I was like, what the heck is a land hurricane?
Let me
Right?
Google
Like, never heard of this before. And then suddenly I start seeing like a couple tipped over semi trucks here and there. And I'm like, oh goodness. So I'm on this call with a vendor, and I've got my headphones in and I'm talking to them. One of my best friends is sitting in the passenger seat next to me, just like keeping an eye out on things. And I'm like, hey guys, so I'm taking this fully remote. So I'm not on camera. I'm driving the moving truck, and if I cut out, it's either A, I lost service, or
you.
B, like the truck got tipped over by a 90-mile-per-hour wind gust from Iowa. And they're like, oh my
Oh
gosh.
my
And I'm like,
gosh.
yeah, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Like, we'll be fine. Um, Good news, nothing happened. Everybody was
Yeah, I'm
safe.
glad.
But yeah, kind of a crazy story.
I mean, I think that's certainly one extreme of a crazy story, but I do think it speaks to finance professionals and just doing what it takes to get things done, right? Like, when else were you going to talk to that vendor and negotiate things or get things, moving along, right? There's like, I think a lot of finance professionals might have done the same thing. Maybe they weren't be driving cross country, hitting a land hurricane, but I
Yeah,
think it speaks to the profession and just that type of ethic that you have. Okay, so finally you get all your stuff over to Salt Lake City. You're several weeks, several months into Peak. Would love to learn more about Peak and where the business is headed.
sure. Yeah, so it's been a ride at Peak for sure. So the week I started was the week we announced our Series C fundraising. We raised over $80 million. Got some great investors, West Cap and Goldman, people who they know the industry, they know the business, and they expressed a lot of confidence in Peak and our management team. We invested in a really great management team. We brought on a COO who's very seasoned and very great at building businesses and doing mergers and acquisitions and taking them public. We brought on a CFO that was a better fit for the size of our business, and that really made sense for where we were headed and what we are going. His name's Jason. He's who I report to. He's been great to work with. And and then the world hit a little bit of a depression, a little bit of a hiccup, and so we had to pause and say, okay, are we making the right decisions? Are we doing the right things? Series C was just grow, 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 grow at all costs, right? And we started to say, well,
Yeah.
we don't want to be on a bad path. We don't want to be in a path where we tried to grow at all costs, and then a recession hit, and we had to lay off 40-50% of our workforce, right? And so I think we got ahead of it, right? And we were really intelligent about our hiring and really focused and narrowed our vision down to make it so that we wouldn't have to be making these unfortunate and hard decisions later down the road, but
Right.
that we could still deliver on our mission and our objectives and grow like in a more, perhaps a more scalable and leading to profitability much quicker.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess when you had spoken with Peak even before you actually joined this time around. So when you first got to the company, what are some of the signs in the culture or the business processes, activities that validated or didn't validate some of the assumptions you had coming in?
Sure. I think one of the things, I was fortunate when I accepted this position. There was one of my old classmates from school who was working at Peak. He still works here, actually, in strategy. And so I got to chat with him a little bit and learn about things. And, I think culturally speaking, you're always going to find one or two things that aren't great. And hopefully those aren't big things, right? And so when I came into Peak, there were some things that I was like, I don't love that. I don't love this, right? But what I did love is I could call anybody in any department and say, hey, I have a question, or I have an idea, or I have a thought. And they'd be like, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's do that. Right. Like, let me see how I can help. Right. And so, one of our values is to collaborate with purpose. And I feel like that's not a challenge here. Right. Nobody is resistant to collaboration. It was funny. I talked about how we're about halfway through 2022, and I was like, man, we don't have department budgets. It'd be really nice to have that. So I started talking to some of the department heads and was like, hey, next year I'm going to work really hard with the team to roll out like department budgets and like track versus budget. And everybody was like, oh, awesome. That'd be so great. I'd love to do that. And I was like, I don't think I've ever heard
what's going on here. Is this reality?
About budgets before? Like what world do we live in? Right. Like, and so it's just things like that where people were eager to have a finance partner that could help them and benefit their organization. People were eager to collaborate on different things, and to me, those were big. Those were great, right? And then just great people, intelligent people, fun people to be around. All these things that I felt like people cared, right? And so it was cool. And then I remember I had this one meeting, and I was sitting in this meeting, and it was with our CRO and one of our senior directors of business development. And as I sat there and I thought about it, I was like, here's this guy, Zach, who has worked in finance of these different PE-backed firms and really in the mid-market space. And then here's our CRO who has come from he came from Bain, did consulting, did all this kind of stuff, right? And then here's one of our senior directors of business development, and he was like a previous tour operator and a previous tour guide, right? And took people on backpacking trips on the East Coast to go drink really fancy wine, right? And so I'm like, what a unique group of people to be in a room. And I didn't feel like we were lacking anything as far as intelligence or capability or caliber of individuals, right? And so to be able to have that in one place it was cool. It was refreshing.
Absolutely. And this group of people you're able to work with, now you're able to introduce these department level budgets and really empower each of these departments to be making decisions, knowing the financials. How has that journey gone for you? Any tips along the way for others introducing a department budget for the first time at their company?
Yeah. So expect delays, right? It's never going to go as quickly or as smoothly as you want, especially the first time. And so I had this grand vision of having a budget kickoff call and a timeline and all this stuff, right? And we didn't do that, and we probably won't do that, right? And would I have liked to be finished with our budget mid-December? Sure, that'd be great. Candidly, we probably won't be done until sometime in January, right? Maybe bleed over into February a little bit. But these are okay things, right? Because we're having good conversations, we're having intelligent conversations, and we're doing it in a way that's going to benefit the business. And so, I'm willing to sacrifice maybe some formality or some tight deadlines if it means benefiting the business overall.
Yeah, absolutely. It really, I don't know, forces may be too strong, but it really encourages the strategic thought for the whole year for these departments and thinking about collaboration and thinking about the impact. You'd much rather have that than a random number. You're like, okay, locked and loaded before January 1.
It drives me crazy when I hear oh, that's the finance number. Oh, that's the finance number. I'm like, no, that's not the mindset I want to have in this business. It's oh, finance gave me this number, right? But it's great because when you have these conversations, things pop up, right? And so we put out all of our software spend, and sales is oh, hey, I know Salesforce is sales, but there's way too much expense here. half the seats aren't even sales seats. So why am I carrying so much of this expense, right? And so then we get into the
Right.
conversation of like, what should we do with this spend?
Yeah.
Where should we put this, right? And should it all sit in sales? Should some of it sit in sales? How do we
Right.
go about
Right.
dividing this? What makes the most sense?
Yeah. And what is the best investment for each department to be putting into a tool like that? Right. And
Yeah,
what is the ROI? No, super,
absolutely.
super interesting conversations that sort of come up in this evolution, whichever company will go through of this departmental budget or some other cut of the P&L that you need to be looking at. All right, this has gone by way too fast. Leading into the last few minutes here, would love to hear just maybe like some fun tips, things on finance, any advice, and then we can't let you go without sharing your favorite peak experience as well.
Sure, sure. So, tips on finance. Oh goodness. I think as I alluded to at the beginning, and as I like to tell my team all the time, is nothing replaces people skills in finance. And I think we like to
Hmm.
think that finance is a numbers game, but it's not. It's a communication. It's a relationship building experience, right? And so you have to be able to tell your story and tell the story of the numbers and get people to buy into that and believe it. And then you also have to be able to dig in and sit with your sales team, for example, and say
Right.
like, hey, do I really trust this? Does this really make
Yeah.
sense? Do
Yep.
we trust each other enough to have a clear and open communication about this? And so I think, don't get me wrong, you have to be analytical, you have to know numbers, you have to be smart in that
Right.
category, but that's not going to take you to be an elite member of a finance team, right? What's going to make you great, what's going to make you exceptional is that you can do something with those and you can communicate those. And so I always push my team to be building relationships across the department, across the organization, finding ways to be helpful and be beneficial, be service oriented to other people. So that's maybe my finance tidbit. I'd also
Couldn't
say
agree
be open.
more.
Yeah, I'd also say be open to new ideas, right? So coming on, I'll share. This is a fun little peak story. We implemented a software within my first couple months of joining Peak that I recommended because it was one that I knew and I was very comfortable with. It's been about a year. Turns out that wasn't the right software for us, right? And
Hmm.
now I'm exploring some new ideas and new things that would be more beneficial to our organization. And it's a learning experience, right? And it was an
Right.
expensive learning experience
Right.
because we paid to implement it and we paid the monthly cost for it. But we needed to learn and we needed to have something there. So I'm not upset
Yeah.
about it necessarily, but so I think don't just fall into old habits. Don't fall into what's familiar or comfortable. Look for new ways to do things, better ways, better softwares, better things, right? That will improve you overall.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more with the last two things that you shared with our audience.
Absolutely.
All right, Zach, last thing here. What's your favorite peak activity that you're going to try or that you've done?
Sure. So I would say there's two great ones. So we did an offsite with our finance leadership team, and we jumped on a sailboat in San Francisco and went and sailed through the harbor. And I love water. I love sailing. I think it's really fun and really cool. So that was a great experience. And the
Nice.
partners that we worked with there were fantastic. We were running a little late, and one of our members was on crutches, and so we called ahead, and they were like, "Not a problem. We'll hang out for you. Like, just get here. We
Yeah.
want to have you be part of this." And then my wife and I actually we were in Louisiana. We went down to New Orleans, and we got to go do a full day tour of plantations from one of our partners,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
had this great guide that took us on these tours, and we were fortunate enough to do it right on Juneteenth, and so
Hmm.
a very sobering
That's
experience to
super
be able to do
special.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool, and so learned a ton, and it was a lot of fun. And our guide was fantastic and gave us some really great cooking tips. So my wife is working on perfecting her gumbo recipe, and it's getting pretty good. So
Wow. Thank you for sharing those. Lots more on Peak, all the experiences there. So definitely go check it out. Zach, it's been a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining. Happy
absolutely,
Thanksgiving to you, your family, and everyone else out there. Appreciate
you
it.
as well. Thanks,
All
Rose.
right. Good one.
See ya.